WNST, Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We are positively into football season. I know it's hard to take, especially with the Orioles winning and the trading deadline and all that stuff, but Lucas dusted off the old purple flag, and he's headed out to Owings Mills. They let him in. They don't let me in, so he is the source for all of these things. We'll be counting on him on a daily basis here, even though the Orioles play some nights and he has to do both because neither team lets me in because they fear me. But I'll be getting into that in our 25th anniversary next week. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. I'll be giving away, I don't know if it's going to be these or not because I only have a handful of these left, but August 3rd is our 25th anniversary. I have books and tapes and pictures and shirts and hats and things and a seat cushion and autographed Ray Lewis stuff and autographed Joe Flacco stuff that I just want to give away. So we will be doing this on August the 3rd, including scratch-offs in the Maryland Lottery. You get a chance to win $100. Our friends at Win Donation also putting on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour and our 25th anniversary. 866-90-NATION. You buy two, you get two free. 0% financing for 2 years. And next week's the 1-year anniversary of my windows, and certainly going to need them as it heats up. You know, Luke, humidity gets to 80%. It's 94 degrees. It must be time for training camp, right? And here we are. The most unusual of training camps in a lot of ways because the Orioles are so relevant, right? So on the tip of our tongue, so 6 days a week, if not 7 days a week. At least they don't play 14 innings anymore. But it's a baseball heartbeat here as we go into football. Dare I say, with high expectations in Owings Mills. You've been out there. Towel off for us here. And I guess the full preview would be it's going to be a JK Dobbins derby, right? Like that. The drama isn't Lamar anymore, the Lamarathon or any specific injury. The drama now is the running back, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the biggest headline. I mean, I think Rashad Bateman, he's also starting on PUP and still dealing with some remnants from the foot injury from a year ago. So he's going to be worth monitoring. You know, the sense I've gotten is we might not see him the first week or two, but it doesn't sound like it's something that they're overly concerned about at this point. But then again, it's a foot injury, and we know how important that is. But you just said it. I mean, with JK Dobbins, he's officially on the PUP list. I don't get the sense that we're going to hear, we're not going to get any clarity on the record about, from what John Harbaugh is going to say. And that's how these, quote, hold-ins, not a holdout, but a hold-in, that's how it kind of plays out. A player says that he's not ready to practice, whether it's a hamstring issue or conditioning issue, whatever it might be. But we know that the real story behind it is a business rationale to it. Now, I have not gotten a sense if this means JK Dobbins plans to hold in for an extended period of time. I've heard from some people in the building that they wonder if he might still be out there the first couple of days of practice and play it out because I don't think I don't think Dobbins is dumb. I don't think these running backs that are trying to play their hand however they can in what has become such an overly depressed market at that position. We've talked about this for years, but it only seems to be getting worse in that way. I don't think they're dumb, but I think there is a sense of what do we do about it? And in the case of JK Dobbins specifically, you and I have talked about it. I've talked about it with Dennis. I've talked about it with other people in this local market, fans and media. And the general sense is Dobbins has to go out there and play. He doesn't have the track record of a Saquon Barkley or of a Josh Jacobs or some other running backs who are frankly collecting dust on the market. I mean, the Ravens just brought in.
Would also be that they can't win without him, right? And look, man, I'll give Mark Ingram, and I know there were mixed reviews on him in and outside the organization and big trust and all the things but they haven't been the same without him. To a large degree, and the Gus Bus that was sort of this finishing bulldozer that would come in when it was 41-7 at LA Memorial Coliseum on a Monday night in purple jerseys, right? So you go back to that era of what they were, and listen, it's different when I have NFL agent Chad Wiesling out at Spirits West a couple of weeks ago. By the way, the Godfather's Wednesday. If you want to go out there and get the sandwich, I still got to get out there. Keep looking at that picture and drooling and watching Pika eat that thing. But we spent an hour and a half, Chris and I with Chad Wiesling, talking about Josh Jacobs and the running back position and that money. I've seen all of this conjecture the last couple of weeks since I did that piece where like the running backs have a little text thread and maybe there's a little like down low underground union forming amongst the running backs. But to some degree, it's, hey, dude, if you ripped your knee up in the last preseason game, we'd live without you. Now, that being said, they tried to live without Jamal Lewis here one year, and that didn't go so well, right? So, and we've tried to live without this running back thing, and Lamar in harm's way, which he's going to put himself in harm's way anyway. I'm convinced that it's just the way he plays the game when he's effective in playing the game, that it would cripple the Ravens if JK Dobbins isn't on the field the first week of September for whatever reason. Injury, PUP, hurt feelings, hold out. All the running backs decide the first week of the year they're not going to play. I don't know what that does, but I don't think they're sweating this out in Owings Mills, right? Like in a lot of ways, I said to you about Lamar's contract a year ago, 2 years ago. This is for fans to talk about, but like in the building, they'll just put another running back in and hit a tackling dummy, and that's the way it rolls right now. And if he's ready to play, he'll play, and if he can play, he will play. And if he doesn't want to play, they'll just go play without him. Although he's banging pots and pans, I don't think the organization is nearly as concerned about this as the running backs on the whole, and Chad and Josh Jacobs and all their agents are about the position.
Yeah, I think that's fair for the most part. I mean, look, is JK Dobbins the best running back on their roster right now? Yeah, and I don't think it's particularly close. That said, how much is the position truly worth? And I don't mean that in the sense that running backs don't matter. I know Aaron Schatz and other football analytics types over the years have kind of they've been beating that drum, but even some of those individuals, like Aaron Schatz, for example, have said probably wasn't as much running backs don't matter as much as offensive line really, really, really matters to your running game. And in the case of the Ravens specifically, not just Lamar Jackson running the ball, but more specifically, the threat of Lamar Jackson running the ball has made JK Dobbins better, made Mark Ingram better 4 years ago, has helped Gus Edwards. So, yeah. Do the Ravens want Dobbins on the field? Absolutely. Does he give them more upside at that position than anyone else they have on the roster, including having just signed Melvin Gordon, a former 2-time Pro Bowl selection? Yeah. But is this going to, is their season ruined if JK Dobbins decides to hold out? And I don't think, I'd be surprised if it would leak into the regular season. I think you're talking about skipping the first couple weeks of training camp, something along those lines.
Well, that's what define hold in for my people, because I'm still trying to get my arms around the term hold. What the hell is hold in? Describe that.
Hold in is they are in the building, they are taking part in meetings, because if you hold out when you're under contract, you're subject to a daily fine. And I'm trying to think what the number is off the top of my head. I should know this, but it's at least a substantial 5-figure fine especially for a player who's on a rookie contract. It would add up. It would add up after a while. So we've seen more and more players do this in recent years, where they report, so they're not breaking any rules that way. They're taking part in all team meetings. But when it comes to where the real risk is, which we know is being on the field and actually practicing and potentially being hit and potentially suffering a non-contact injury, whatever, that's where the action or inactivity takes place, where they say, I'm not ready to practice. And, whether it's a hamstring, whether they say it's a conditioning thing, whether it's some other lingering issue, everyone kind of knows what's going on, but what you say publicly, it's a little bit different. So that's why you saw Dobbins placed on the active PUP list, and he can practice at any point. And again, maybe he's out there. Maybe he's already out there by the time someone's listening to you and I talk about this. I don't think it's a fait accompli as far as how he's going to proceed, but it's clear that he's been part of, I don't know if you mentioned almost like the running backs forming their own little union or a coalition, whatever it is. I mean, clearly there's concern, and understandably so. I've talked about this a lot. It's been written about a lot in recent years, but in the case of Dobbins individually, he has to have a great year, right? I mean, he wants to get paid by the Baltimore Ravens or by one of the 31 other teams. That only happens if he goes out and has a healthy season where he's playing at least 15 or 16 games, let's say, and has over 1,000 yards, shows some chops as a receiver out of the backfield, which I think he'll have an opportunity to do in Todd Monken's offense. That was not really something that was part of Greg Roman's offense for these running backs. So there's plenty for him to gain and still a lot for him to lose by not playing. That's the difference here. And frankly, I think
Well,
that's
then you'd say
still
whether practice is important or not, right?
well,
I don't know that he's good enough to not practice. I mean,
well,
like literally.
and I think that's and that's where we get into this gray area, right? If he skips the first week, if he skips the first 2 weeks of practice, do I think that has a tangible, significant impact on his season? No, I don't. However, if you're talking about him not practicing until August 28th, then I think we are getting into different territory there. So I think again, how this plays out is going to be very interesting. It's certainly, and let's be clear, we're talking about this as a headline. This pales in comparison to what we could have been talking about over the last 2 weeks with franchise tag deadline for Lamar Jackson, and if he hadn't reached a long-term deal, when the heck was your franchise quarterback going to show up? Now that would have been far more dramatic, far more consequential. So I'm with you though. Do the Ravens want Dobbins out there? Of course they do. Especially John Harbaugh and the coaching staff. Do they, are they in a position where they're losing sleep over this at the moment? I don't think they're at that point yet because I don't think there's a sense that they're worried about Dobbins sitting out the year, for example, or sitting out the first few games because he doesn't have the track record of some of these other backs. So he still has way too much to gain by playing. Now, that might mean he slow plays it for himself and he's not out there till August 8th or August 10th. But as long as he's out there and he's every indication I've gathered is he's in great shape. There's no question about that for him. It's not as though he's not putting in the work, but you still need to practice and get ready for football shape, right? So I think that's where, right now there's definitely some unknown, definitely some drama, definitely some frustration
There's
on his
always
part.
drama, right? I mean, like
There's always something,
this
right?
organization has had months and months and months of drama with the quarterback. They finally settle that down. There's going to be an injury at some point. Something stupid's going to happen because it's going to happen in every camp,
Yeah,
which is one of the reasons I got no vibe with, JK Dobbins. Hold out, hold in, do
sure.
whatever you need to do as long as you're ready to play against Houston. Like, fair enough, you know what I mean? And I don't know that John's as new age about it as that. And I'll be writing a lot about John this season and my thoughts about John now that I don't have to look at him. You do, but I don't have to look at him to ask questions, and I'm not allowed to ask questions. There'll be a lot of questions, and I would just say this to you. So beyond Dobbins, okay, forget that that's there because I'm not all that concerned with it. For me, this is about Monken, the installation of the offense, who's going to play guard, how healthy Ronnie Stanley is, where are we with Odell Beckham and Zay Flowers, and listen, Luke. The amazing thing is when I go out now, wherever I go, literally, I spent the entire evening on Sunday in Dewey Beach. I didn't get out of the car other than the gas up at Rofo in Queenstown, and I pull into Dewey Beach. And everywhere I went at a Tommy Conwell show, Philadelphia guy, the Ravens people, Oriole people in the bar, Joe from Bel Air, bend in my ear, and they're all talking Orioles, but when it moves to the Ravens, it's about like, hey, is Bateman healthy? It's always about health, and it's always
Sure.
about there's no questions about Roquan Smith, right? There's no questions even about Lamar's health at this point. This is now about like, all right, we're 5-6 weeks out on playing. This is the first time you and I have had, a breath that's not pitching, Mike Elias, trading deadline, Gunner, Adley, Shohei. It's been all baseball around here. When we vibe into this, these preseason games are awful. The only news they're going to make out there is an injury at this point because you're going to tell me how Zay Flowers zigs and Bateman zags and Odell Beckham's going to take pretty pictures and he's going to be drinking out of a hose and it's going to be all, like it's going to be all training camp and pictures and autographs and kids, I guess, as it should be, right? But the next 5 or 6 weeks, they want it to be quiet out there. I think they expect it to be mainly quiet. And the only thing that's going to make noise for you is that dreaded WNST
Yeah.
text where something awful happens in a way that we don't want it to, like the way it did with Dennis Pitta or like that this time of the year where quiet, hot, is good, and less preseason games is certainly good, man.
Yeah, and we've seen certainly, starting with I mean, it started the last few years, but especially post 2021 with what happened with Dobbins, with some other players they lost in that preseason. We saw it last year. I mean, very few starters played at all, and even some of
Anywhere.
right. I mean, even some of the lesser starters, even those guys were, getting a series or two, and all indications are pointing to that continuing. So, preseason football continuing to be awful.
And it
And
makes for screwy games when like the Bengals take it seriously or whatever, right? Like there's some teams that will play some starters here and again to get them ready, and it doesn't always jibe with what John's trying to do or what Mike Tomlin's
yeah,
trying to do, right?
yeah. I mean, it's always strange, and it tends to be newer coaches, newer coaching staffs, and younger teams. Quite frankly, I mean, there's clearly some benefit for less experienced teams to do some of that, but I certainly have not gotten the indication just because Todd Monken and a new offense and some new moving parts at wide receiver. Yeah, we're gonna have to wait for week one
Well,
for
the only
for
one that's going
for
to see it
most of
is you
that.
guys out on the practice field, like literally,
Right,
right?
right. And again, even that, how much can you really glean from that? I mean, I can tell you there were plenty of years where Greg Roman's offense was working on the passing game a ton, and then the game starts and well, they're running the ball. So you always want to keep that in mind. But you just said it, and I think that's what's so interesting about this. And frankly, I think John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta and even Steve Bisciotti are okay with this from the standpoint of let training camp go under the radar a little bit more than normal. I mean, it's wild, Nestor, and I'm sure you're experiencing the same thing. People in my life, whether I'm talking about my own friends and family, whether I'm talking about people I follow on social media that I've just interacted with for years, people that I would say are football, Ravens people, 90% of the time, 95% of the time,
Or they went
barely pay.
years without mentioning baseball to you,
Yeah, right.
right?
And
Literally,
it's not
yeah.
even just the Orioles, but like they don't mention a whole lot of other sports in general. It's Ravens all the time. And yet all I'm seeing the last couple months is them posting about the Orioles or them asking me about the Orioles. And look, that's great. That's a good thing. That's a positive. But so it'll be interesting to see how that meshes with training camp starting. And look, it's the NFL, right? It's the Ravens. There's still so much enthusiasm. They're going to have 1,000
Oh,
plus
dude,
people
come
out there.
September 7th,
Yeah, yeah.
when they kick off on that Thursday
Going to be
night
king.
and we can't find the game because it's on Amazon Prime or whatever the hell it is, right? And once you can start betting on it, and once you can start playing fantasy, and once Lamar zigs or zags or, whatever happens with Lamar, it will, and it's going to be different this year. And
Hmm.
he'll definitely feel that with his salary and the expectation level when he throws the pick against the Giants that cost the game. It magnifies. It just
Hmm.
does in the same way it magnifies when Kyle Bradish takes the ball now because it's just different. It's just different when Dean Kramer has the ball in Philadelphia on Monday night and every pitch matters. And we're going to be living with that, even though we're not really living with that. But once you get to first place, we got trading deadline this week. I mean, the football oxygen and what's going to be there for you going back and forth because again they don't let me in, which really sucks. I mean, especially on Monday where you're working training camp and the Phillies are playing and I'm 60 miles away from being 68 miles away from the stadium. I can get up there. It is an interesting summer on a day by day basis where sports has come flooding in and it's not really about the football team until September 7th. We're going to talk about it every day, and there's going to be
Sure.
stories and whatever, but there's not really any activity in Owings Mills other than this guy took more reps or this guy didn't or this guy's got a hamstring pull and that guy doesn't because even the games don't ramp to anything. The games are I mean, they're a joke. When you and I joke, we were joking about them 10 years ago. Now they start on Twitter, and it's like you're not even going to stop what you're doing in Ocean City on a Thursday night at 7 o'clock to think about anything other than did JK Dobbins rip his knee up. And I remember exactly where I was when that happened. And I,
Yeah.
I guess I'm one of the 20% that were actually watching the game that night because it was a hazy, lazy Friday night at 6 o'clock. It was early in the evening. It's crazy. But Luke is here. He is Baltimore Luke. You can find him anywhere good sports are sold. The Orioles, the Ravens. He'll be in both places. We are specifically on to the Ravens right now. We're doing plenty of Oriole talk, plenty of trade talk, plenty of Shohei Ohtani talk. But from the football perspective, give me the Luke Jones questions and the things that you're picking the mind of John Harbaugh, picking the sort of pieces apart of what Monken's trying to do out there. They have tools in the toolbox here. I mean, and
Yeah.
there's a high level of expectation for what this offense can be. And that means like they got to go out and put up 40 points some weeks. You know what I mean? This getting to 17 points, 20 points, kicking 3-4 field goals. I mean, as much as we love Justin Tucker and he's the GOAT and he's going to Canton and all that, they need to score touchdowns and they need to possess the ball and they need to be in good down and distance. All those things we saw in 2019, need to see more of that. What are you looking for?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what you just said, and I mean, they were doing that for the beginning of the Greg Roman era, but it got to a point where it plateaued and got to a point where it was starting to backslide. So that's why they made the move they made. Look, during training camp specifically, and because of the nature of what we can and can't report, tactical information, all that, compared to just observations, these are questions that will be ongoing, right? And even week one, we're not going to get the full answer to that. Week two, we won't have the full answer to that. I think right now, some of these questions that we ask, Todd Monken and John Harbaugh and T. Martin, their quarterbacks coach, they're all asking the same thing. And it's all going to be a matter of, what exactly they can and can't handle, what Lamar Jackson can and cannot handle in terms of a new offense. And that's not unique to Lamar or unique to the Ravens offense. That's how every team, they go through their install in the preseason and they kind of figure out, what do we do really well? What do we do pretty well? And what do we put on the back burner or scrap entirely because that doesn't really fit our profile, our personnel, our specific players. So, I think, clearly there's going to be so much focus on the passing game, and that's for obvious reasons. You have a quarterback that's the highest paid player in the NFL. You have added Odell Beckham. You've added Zay Flowers, who indications I get, they're extremely high on Zay Flowers. And I don't just mean, oh, he's our first round pick, we like him. I think they feel that he's going to be a very significant part of what they do from day one. And I think they feel that he has the kind of potential, even though he's not the prototype big wide receiver. I think they feel that he absolutely has the potential that he could be their number one wide receiver. Maybe not week one, but at some point later this year and certainly moving forward in the future. That's what they think of Zay Flowers. That's how high they are on him. So, but specifically for the offense, issues you're looking at, I already mentioned it in passing. How's Rashad Bateman's foot? He's on PUP to start the summer. There isn't, from what I've gathered, there's not this dramatic concern that there's some kind of chronic issue, but he had the cortisone shot back in June. He had screws removed from his foot from going back to the Liz Frank injury. It's a Liz Frank. Jimmy Smith played with years and years after his, and he'd be the first to tell you that was the most frustrating, nagging, annoying injury that he had because he'd feel it on a cool damp day. He'd feel that. So certainly that's worth monitoring with Bateman. You mentioned left guard and passing. That's the most obvious position battle they have on either side of the football right now. I think they would love Big Sala, the 6th round pick, who turned some heads in the spring. They would love to see him take the brass ring there and, take the baton and run with it at left guard. You'd love to have a rookie who has 3 more years of team control after 2023 take that job. Is it going to happen? We'll have to see. Again, contact, the threat of contact, putting on the pads, far different than talking about spring workouts. So, they have John Simpson at left guard as well as an option. I think he's kind of he's the veteran where I think they feel they know what they can get out of him. He's probably the proverbial high floor option, whereas Big Sala is probably the high ceiling option. And we'll see how Ben Cleveland fits into that picture. I didn't mince any words about the fact that he didn't look like he was particularly in the mix in the spring. In fact, he was moving around some other positions. So left guard's the big question mark, but that's not fans aren't waiting with bated breath for updates on the left guard picture. It's going to be all about the passing game, all about how Lamar looks, all about, what practicing, adjusting at the line of scrimmage, hurry up offense. They have talked at length about wanting to play with more tempo, which was such a point of contention with Greg Roman and delay of game penalties and all of that. So how much of that was Roman? How much of that was Lamar? How much of that was other players? I mean, these are the kind of things we find out, right? You can spend the entire offseason, and I don't mean the Ravens, but everyone talking about it, right? And it's easy to point at Greg Roman because he's not here anymore. And certainly there were elements of what he did that had been part of his track record where passing game, whether you're talking Ravens, Buffalo, San Francisco, it had kind of always reached the same end point where Greg Roman can't take you any further in terms of your passing game and taking your offense to a new level. So enter Todd Monken, and we'll see how that's going to play out. But, Lamar Jackson needs to be better. Their wide receivers that are incumbents need to stay on the field and be better. They need Odell Beckham to stay on the field. What's this going to look like for Mark Andrews, who frankly was allowed to do a lot of freelancing and a lot of option route type stuff under Greg Roman because frankly they didn't trust anyone else throwing the football. There's going to be more structure for him, and that doesn't mean that his production is going to suffer or he won't continue to be a great player, but it'll be different compared to him and Lamar having that playground rapport that they've had for the last few years. So, that'll be an adjustment. You mentioned Ronnie Stanley's health. That's an ongoing thing. He's healthy at the moment. He's as healthy at this point in a calendar year than he's been in 3 years. So that's great to see, but you want that to continue. And I'm sure they'll manage his workload during practice. So, the offense is going to garner the Lions' share of the attention. However much attention the Ravens are getting during training camp that's not injury related, as you pointed out, because there's so much focus on the Orioles. But, on the defensive side of the ball, I think you feel good about the defense. And I think in most areas you feel really good about the defense. But edge rusher, I don't get the sense that a Justin Houston signing is imminent. And they've even brought in some other individuals.
They started leaking last week that it was imminent. You know what I mean? They had their employees writing that they thought this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Clearly, that was a little bit of I don't know. Maybe he's having a hold in at this point. He doesn't want to come in and practice, right? I mean, all these veteran guys, they'd rather sign August 15th than July 15th for most of them because they don't get paid till September 10th. So, right. I would think somebody gets hurt in a practice somewhere. It won't be JK Dobbins, but somebody gets hurt somewhere, and you get an opportunity to come in and play, or they just don't like the players they have. Like, whatever it would be that you could squeeze another $500,000 or $1 million out of a team. Why wouldn't you hold in? What's the hurry for Justin Houston? The Ravens are still going to need him on August 25th. I believe that, right?
I mean, whether it's him or another player of that ilk, another veteran of that ilk, where you're talking about. We
spent 8 months talking about Peters, talking about him. I'm talking more about Calais Campbell because dude took a lot of snaps.
He did.
And played at a high level for a lot of snaps and showed leadership skill. It was off the charts that they're hoping they can, import some, Roquan Smith into this thing here that Marlon Humphrey doesn't have, or Patrick Queen, who won't be here next year and knows he won't be here next year, like all of that. This is quite a soup on the defensive side, too, where it's not going to look like it looked last year at all. And they do need more oomph out of Owa and Patrick Queen. And,
David Ajabo, yeah.
Yeah, and they need the safety to step up second year and be the Pro Bowler that he thinks he is and out on the field. And they use the back end of the secondary in a very hybrid, interesting way, and substitute in an interesting way that other than Humphrey, I don't know that you have dominance back there, although they spent a lot of money and a lot of collateral last year on the safety position that you and I should not have any complaints about the back end of the secondary, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the secondary, and you just said it, I mean, you mentioned the word hybrid. I mean, they really have tried to construct a secondary that is much more of what they call, positionless defense, where basically you can line those guys up just about anywhere. I mean, Humphrey's a great example of this. I mean, we've seen Marlon play on the outside. We've seen him play the nickel at a very high level. Kyle Hamilton, he's going to play more of a conventional safety role this year because Chuck Clark's no longer in the secondary. But we saw him play nickel. That's what he played most of the second half of last season. So you have some of that. for me, I already mentioned edge rusher, pass rusher. Do they add a Justin Houston or someone like that at some point in time here between now and week one? I still I still think you're going to see that. And I'm not saying it's going to be Houston, but I think you'll see a veteran, whether it's a free agent or maybe you trade, some kind of pick swap, minor kind of trade where, hey, some guy's in the last year of his deal. We think he can, help us set the edge a little bit, give us a little pass rushing juice. So I still anticipate we're going to see that at some point. It just might not be the first week of training camp. But, for me, most of the secondary I feel good about, but the one area that I do have a little more concern is where's their outside corner depth? I mean, you have Marlon Humphrey, you've added Rock Yassin, who's going to be their starting, he's replacing Marcus Peters, who now is officially a Las Vegas Raider. So you can close the door on that potential return, which never got the sense that that was likely, but I think the Ravens would have considered it under the right circumstance, specifically with an injury or something like that. But who's their depth behind those guys in terms of outside corners? They have a slew of slot/nickel options. They have those guys between safeties and some other young corners on the roster. But you're looking at guys like Caillou Blue Kelly, their 5th-round pick this year. Is he ready to play? If an injury occurs, you have Jalen Armour Davis, who we saw early last year and struggled and couldn't stay on the field. They've added Trayvon Mullen, who's a former early draft pick, and he looked pretty good this spring. But again, covering guys in May is not the same as covering in September. So,
this is where the preseason games,
those guys are going to play a lot.
Yeah, these are where you're going to make your Bobby Raineys, and guys are going to play their way in or play their way onto the "I'm hurt this year, we're going to hide you" list, right?
Yeah. So that for me, I mean, the outside corner depth, I mean, I just, and there's some other guys, Brandon Stevens, who's probably going to play more safety this summer, but he's an outside corner option still. They have Daryl Worley, who's a veteran outside corner option, although he was playing a lot of safety in the spring. You notice a trend here. They want their guys their secondary members are cross training at this point. They want these guys to be able to play multiple spots because Mike McDonald can use that much more deception with coverage. And that's just such a big part of what they do, rather than maybe the Wink years where they're playing a lot of man and just blitzing the heck out of the quarterback. Mike McDonald's a little more nuanced in how they do that. So, but that's the thing. If something happens to, Marlon Humphrey, you're talking about an all-pro, Pro Bowl cornerback, but even Rock Yassin, who's going to be their starting outside corner opposite Humphrey, he's had some injury issues in his career. I think he's a solid player. I think they like him. I don't think they're expecting him to be Marcus Peters, but I think they like him. But he's had some problems staying on the field in the past. So generally, when you're talking, and how I've banged the table about depth at cornerback for years and years and years. That's something. There are a few things that can torpedo a season more quickly than having a couple injuries at corner and not having at least some okay depth behind them.
It cost Brian Billick his job 15. Literally, it implodes a season. You can't win. No matter how many points Lamar scores, if the defense is going to be a sieve in this division against these people, it's not going to go well. It's not
this conference at this point. This conference, the AFC in general, it's that deep. So that's my question right now. Who is their number 3 outside corner? That doesn't mean they have to play on a down by down basis, because they'll have nickels. They have guys that can handle that job. But who's going to be their number 3 and number 4 outside corner spots that if Marlon Humphrey turns his ankle and Rock Yassin tweaks a hamstring midway through the third quarter, suddenly those guys are out there, or at least one of those guys have to be out there, then who's going to be that number 3 outside corner? Who's going to be that number 4 outside corner? I mentioned, you've got young inventory, young corners that you've drafted, and you clearly you like to some degree, but there's another position where I could see a veteran addition, whether it's bringing back a Kyle Fuller, who obviously had the ACL injury in week 1 last year, or again, is there a potential, does someone shake free because some team wants to, they want to go cheap at the position, and some veteran corner that's good enough to be a nice depth piece, but isn't really a starter anymore, gets let go elsewhere. I think Eric DeCosta is still going to be looking for that, but in the meantime, evaluating these younger options. Ideally, these young guys are ready to be, we're not talking starters. We're talking number 3, number 4 outside corner depth for you. You'd hope that they can do that, but you've got to see evidence that they can do that and they can stay on the field and they look like they know what they're doing. And, so if Marlon Humphrey, you know, turns his ankle and maybe isn't even out for the game, but misses a series, misses a few plays, you don't want to have to put someone in where you're terrified that automatically the other team is going to throw the ball over their head and you're going to give up a touchdown, which is what happened in the Dolphins game in week 2 last year. So those are the, talking about edge rusher, talking about corner, the depth discussion at those two positions is very much ongoing. And I think the Ravens, in a perfect world, they would like to see their young guys step forward. They have high hopes for Owe and David Ajabo at edge. They have high hopes for some of those, mid-round corners that they've selected, that they've drafted in recent years. But it's tough because for them to prove themselves, what has to happen? They have to play. So I think there is a sense of maybe holding off on a veteran addition or two, at least these first few weeks of training camp, see how they're competing in practice, and you kind of go from there. So, overall, the defense, I think expectations are high. Not as much attention as the offense for obvious reasons, but I think to a man, I think both coaches and players expect this to be, what it was over the second half of last season, which was, it's a top 5 defense over the second half of last season. They played at a very high level. Wasn't that they didn't lose them the Bengals playoff game? Let's be clear about that. I mean, it was fumbling at the goal line and a touchdown going the other way. So I think they're very confident in what they're doing, but a couple of those positions, very important positions, mind you, some depth concerns, some depth questions have to be answered here over the next 5-6 weeks. And we'll see how it plays out.
We'll get to the schedule later and talking about, like, I start to look at the schedule and I'm like, I mean, they have Texans week. I mean, like, they have like preseason games. They play the Colts in week 3. Like when I look at the quarterbacking situation in these places, and and I see the Deshaun Watson's meeting the meeting in Cleveland, I'll tell you what, I mean, I look down until they get to that Detroit game, and Detroit's supposed to be better, and I'll believe that when I read George Plimpton, that the Lions are better, because I've been watching that a long time. But I look at the first 6, 7, 8 weeks of the season, Cincinnati, about that, Pittsburgh, whatever. But I got to look at the schedule, and I mean, even going over to London and seeing Tennessee over there, I mean, I look up and say they should be 6-2, 7-3. I mean, they should be that kind of a team if they're healthy, no matter what we just talked about, no matter who plays here or there or again. And that's probably me, holding Lamar accountable, because I look at the whole organization, because they're built to win. If they're not 6-2, 7-3, whatever, at this schedule, I want to know who they lost to. Luke is there. He is Baltimore Luke. We're going to get more into football. We have plenty of time for football. Taking the oxygen on baseball as the Orioles travel to Philadelphia, get back home. It's going to be hot as hell this weekend. People are all baseballed up around here. It is summertime in the big city. We're going to be celebrating 25 years at WNST. My hair's not even gray. It's amazing. Just watching the Orioles alone, it's amazing. Maybe that's why. Maybe them banning me helped me in some way. I'm writing about that. It's all brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. Our 25th anniversary is next Thursday. We'll be at Costas. And the reason I'm wearing the Drug City shirt is we're going to be there on the 4th, which is Friday. I'm bringing all of the stuff to Costas. So if you want to come down and get free books, free hats, free shirts, stuff, signs, autographs, I just have a bunch of stuff. I'm going to bring it to Costas at 11 in the morning on Thursday, and it's going to sit there. And hopefully by 5 o'clock, it's all gone. We'll be back at Drug City on Friday. Great guest in and out. If you've heard pieces that you've heard in the past that you want to hear again, drop me a note, nasty@wnst.net or ness@baltimorepositive.com. I have 2 aliases, but it's sort of the same dude. We're putting stuff together. It's 25 years, memories, pictures, barn shows, our top 25 moments that we're going to release weekly around here, beginning the end of August, leading up to the Super Bowl, and all the radio rows, all the Free the Birds, all the road trips, all the charity stuff, all the fun stuff, all the nice guy awards. Whew, we've had a lot of fun around here. I'm worn out thinking about it. You're going to be worn out hearing it the next month or so as we get ready for the beginning of football season with a pennant race. We're lucky. I'm Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive. Stay with us.